Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Ross Barnett, a paleogeneticist looking at the ancient DNA of carnivores.
I'm Seth Chagi, a science communicator who is also an undergrad working on really just kind of science communication and learning how to take big topics and make them understandable for everyone else.
Thanks for being here with us. Kim is away today, so you'll be filling in for her, and it's the perfect episode for you to be here as the host of the World of Paleontology YouTube channel, because we are doing a movie that's been on our list from day one, Quest for Fire. I can't believe we've waited 84 episodes to get to Quest for Fire. Regular listeners will know that we do a lot of terrible movies, so we had to save some well-known good ones, or else we probably would have ended this podcast 50 episodes ago. Seth, can I ask you to summarize this movie for our listeners?
So, The Quest for Fire is, as you mentioned, definitely I'd say fit in the category of what we'd call a bad movie. It's not exactly the greatest of movies. It is entertaining, and it's about these groups of hominins, these altering factions of hominins that are battling over the ability to control fire, this quest for fire, to have life and sustain life, and their journey through battling other groups of hominins, other species, until they get to their end, which we'll find out what that is. But, you know, there's a lot of different species in it, which I think is interesting, how they try to reflect different hominins and how they may have interacted if they were together, which we know, many hominins would have been interacting. But it's interesting how they portray it, I'd say.
I think we could probably spend most of the episode just sorting out who these species are supposed to be, if they're actually supposed to be anybody in particular at all, right?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. There's a wide array of costuming, I'd say. But yeah, it's a watch. It's a watch. I'd say it's a must see for paleo enthusiasts.
For
you
sure,
have to see the bad ones too,
Well, I mean, you're obviously not that familiar with our podcast because, Ross, I would say this is a pretty good one compared to a lot of what we do.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd never seen it before, but it passed my test of not getting put to 1.5 times on YouTube, which suggests that it was able to hold attention. And yeah, I'd never seen it before, but I was pleasantly surprised. It had some interesting ideas in there, and it was executed pretty well.
It was well received too. It's got a 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb. It won a ton of awards, including it had an Academy Award, I think, for Best Costumes. It had a bunch of Genie Awards, which is the Canadian equivalent of the Academy Awards. Because this is a Canadian and French co-production, by the way, which is pretty interesting. So it was filmed half in Canada. I think they had an agreement with the Canadian producers that about 50% of it had to be filmed in Canada. So it was filmed in Ontario and British Columbia and maybe Alberta, I think. But it was also filmed in Scotland, near where you are, in the Scottish Highlands, Ross, and Iceland and Kenya. So it was like all filmed on location all over the world, which is pretty interesting.
That is surprising, yeah.
So typically when we review a movie, we typically start by nitpicking the scientific or historical inaccuracies. For this one, I think maybe we have to determine its setting and context before we can do that. Do you think? Well, I mean, it says it's set 80,000 years ago. So I guess the question is it set 80,000 years ago? Maybe we'll just take it all at once. Is it set 80,000 years ago? Who are all these different species of people supposed to be? And from there, we can start to pick apart whether or not the details actually make sense, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can all agree that that date is not correct.
Well, if you consider the Wagaboo tribe, the first tribe they encounter that attacks them, which are like hairy ape men, certainly we shouldn't really see anybody like that 80,000 years ago, right?
Although,
Yeah, no, I would suggest not.
the Denisovans, we don't know what they were like. They could have been super hairy.
They could have. I suppose anybody could have been hairy because we don't necessarily have any evidence for that one way or the other, right? But
I mean, this is something that confused me, like watching the film. I assumed that the main characters, who are Ron Perlman, just being Ron Perlman with minimal
in
makeup.
his first role, right?
Yeah.
Perfect casting.
Perfect, yeah. The leader of the three of them and the third wheel, who, and at no point did I pick up on what their names were, but I just assumed that they were Neanderthals because they had kind of Neanderthal brow ridges, they had Neanderthal technology, they didn't have language, as far as I could tell. They
have a kind of proto-language. They've got a few words, but not a very fleshed-out grammar, it seems.
No, and they definitely were kind of chimp or bonobo based in terms of their kind of gesturing and shrieking and stuff. And so that kind of, it was only after watching the film that, like, checking up on IMDb and other sources, that apparently there's the main characters are supposed to be kind of early modern humans, which didn't really make a lot of sense to me, because then they meet, and I think that I've referred to her throughout my notes as the Homo sapiens girl, but I think her name is Ika, possibly. Yep. So she is clearly Homo sapiens. She doesn't have brow ridges. She's got complex language, complex tools, pottery or kind of gourd-based technology, beginnings of agriculture. They drink milk, I think. Mm-hmm. So clearly Homo sapiens, but they just look so completely different from Ron Perlman and his buddies that I thought that's what they were going for. And that makes the first tribe, the hairy monkey men, something different.
Yeah, I couldn't find an original source for that, but I read somewhere that it came from the director's commentary on the DVD, where he basically said both. Now I can tell you the names of the tribes. We have the Ulam, who are the main characters, the Neanderthalish ones. The Ivaku are the clear modern human ones wearing the body paint. The Wagaboo are the hairy ape men from the initial attack, and the Kazam are the red-headed troll-like cannibal tribe where they rescue Ivaka from, okay? And so according to wherever I read this, I think it was on tvtropes.com, somebody suggested that it was on the DVD commentary where the director said that both the Ulam and the Ivaku are supposed to be modern humans, and the Kazam are supposed to be Neanderthals. And I'm not clear on where the Wagaboo fall on that, if they are also supposed to be a different type of Neanderthal or something. And I'm not like a big fan of like the death of the author, but in this case, I think we're going to have to reinterpret these, because I think the director is absolutely wrong about who everybody is in this movie, right?
Yeah.
I think I first watched this maybe like 10 years ago. I think I first watched it either during my undergrad or early in my master's. And at the time, I was like you, Ross, obviously the main characters are Neanderthals. They're just perfect Neanderthals. Even compared to like more recent movies, I just think that these are one of the best portrayals of Neanderthals morphologically that we've seen.
Yeah.
And at first I was thinking like, so obviously they have a bit of eyebrow prosthetics. And I was wondering how they made their faces look so Neanderthal, where they're sort of inflated and they've got sort of a lack of chin. I think they just like accidentally cast it perfectly. Like Ron Perlman's face just looks like that.
That's it. He's got the kind of massive Neanderthal nose that's kind of quite spread. That's just Ron Perlman. He is his own special effect.
Cheeks. Yeah, he just is a perfect Neanderthal. So we have to consider that the Ulam are Neanderthals, because that's the only thing that really makes sense to me. And the Ivaku are clearly modern humans. So that only leaves us really the other two to figure out, the Wagaboo and the Kazam.
I mean, I figured that the kind of cannibal redheads, they might have just been Scots. I mean, that's not unusual. If they were filming on the West Coast, then they might have just turned up. They might not have been part of the film. But on a serious, I assumed that they were just a kind of rival group of Neanderthals that had gone a different path. And then the hairy monkey men were just hairy monkey men. I mean, in the sort of time frame and the geographical area that is supposed to be set, there's not really any candidates that we know of, at least from fossil evidence. But who knows? Maybe like at a push, like some of the Dominici Homo erectus, like late survivors or something.
One of the things about this movie is that it has become more accurate as it aged, right? Like it's one of the reasons we can't pin down these people is that it was never meant to be accurate. And you can read a lot from the director talking about how, you know, we can write about speculative fiction about the future where we don't it doesn't have to be what the future is actually going to be. So he's like, why can't I make a speculative fiction movie about the past where it doesn't have to be what actually happened in the past? It can just be a bunch of stuff that has the right feel, right? So, I mean, it's kind of futile to try and pin these down exactly. But at the time, it was criticized because people were like, you've got too many different species of humans intermixing here. And today it's like, no, there were definitely more species than this alive on Earth at the same time. Whether you had 4 in the same geographical area is a little bit more contentious. But certainly modern humans, Denisovans, Neanderthals, they would have been all inhabiting, like they all did inhabit Denisova Cave, not necessarily at exactly the same time. But sort of in Central Asia, we definitely have at least those 3, I mean, not really species, depending on who you talk to, but I mean, 3 different populations interacting at the same time. Plus, at the same time, you've got the Hobbit people in Southeast Asia, the Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis. Potentially you've got at some window of time you've got all of those plus Homo naledi in South Africa, which maybe we can tie this to the Wagaboo, the hairy monkey people, because they're more primitive looking, and Homo naledi tells us that there were more primitive looking humans that survived later than we expected. So all of this makes the movie way more plausible today than it actually was at the time it was made.
Yeah, totally.
Very good point. Yeah.
And even the kind of characterization of Neanderthals as, human, with human kind of concerns, their own culture, the kind of, the whole quest for fire is really, I thought was really cool. The idea that they didn't have the technology to produce fire themselves, so it was sacred to them and they had to kind of look after it. Although they entrusted it in this film to, the most idiotic person it seems that they could have, who managed to drop it in the water not once but twice. I mean, yeah. And they sort of have sort of primitive medicine. They have the kind of right sort of technology. So they have thrusting spears with kind of stone points. Yeah, I thought that the main characters, assuming that we can just call them Neanderthal, have aged really well. And especially when you consider that at the time, sort of out of Africa replacement would have been it's 81 it came out. So
yeah, I don't think Out of Africa would have been fully.
No.
I feel like the early 80s would still be set in the multi-regional hypothesis.
Yeah, possibly. But definitely the kind of depiction of interbreeding between Neanderthals and modern Homo sapiens, that's been vindicated pretty strongly.
In that light, thinking about the multi-regional hypothesis, which is probably what was dominant when this was written, according to that, Neanderthals would have been ancestors to living modern humans, which might be why he calls them both Homo sapiens, because you have the Neanderthals and then you have the more evolved Ivaku modern humans. And so he calls them both Homo sapiens because under the multi-regional model, they would have been both considered Homo sapiens. It's just that the Ivaku are a stage of evolution beyond the Ulam, which maybe it's that they are both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals at the time, because that would have been the same thing in the early 80s.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I can see how if we're thinking of them being as ancestral, it's kind of a transitionary that we're seeing in the movie. That could make sense.
Should we talk about some of the tropes that kind of are our kind of bingo card of because there are quite a few in this film.
Yeah, so Seth, for a while we've been building up a caveman movie bingo card where we call out, we try and get a bingo by getting a straight line of all the classic tropes that we see in every movie. So what do we got? I think this movie is the origin of a lot of the tropes, probably, right?
Yeah, probably. But the kind of classic ending on the shot of a pregnant interspecies hybrid baby about to be born, that's definitely appeared quite a few times.
Most recently, I think in William from 2019, the first movie that we ever did.
We have comedy, rocks falling on head. That's classic.
This was the funniest example of that, though. Yeah. Maybe we'll have to talk about the evolution of humor, which they sort of depict here. But it was a great setup and a great callback, and just hilariously executed with the blood pouring from his head, and he's laughing like crazy about it. That was great.
Yeah, and there are some quite funny bits in it. I also thought it was quite amusing when the leader Neanderthal gets stuck in the swamp on the way to find the modern humans, and he's kind of freaking out in this kind of quicksand sort of swamp bog, and the moderns come and rescue him, and then like a little while later, the other two kind of Neanderthals fall into exactly the same bit of swamp, and just the look on their faces like, oh shit, not this again.
And the comedy is perfect from the filmmaking, right? It's just the way it's cut.
Yeah.
Really fast paced.
Yeah.
You get the joke and then move on, right?
Yeah. Appearance of kind of, I guess, disharmonious biogeographic groups of animals. That happens in quite a lot. That's kind of bingo and a mistake. So you've got mammoths, which are actually really nicely done. I read somewhere that they were circus elephants, which is the same thing that they did for the mounts of the Tusken Raiders in Star Wars, is just get an elephant and stick some wool over the top of it. But it was again nicely cut so that it wasn't too obviously an elephant in a costume, and looked pretty good.
Mm-hmm. They were really good, yeah. How about the saber-toothed cats?
Yeah, well, that was interesting too. I mean, when they first appeared, I thought, oh, cool, they've got some cave lions, because I didn't notice the teeth for like the first few seconds of the shot, and I was impressed when I thought they were cave lions, because neither of them had manes, which is something we know was probably the case with cave lions, that they didn't evolve the mane that African male lions have. So that already kind of, I was like, oh, that's good. But then they had these, like, I think they must have been stuck on, like, just enormous teeth on these kind of showbiz lions, which I guess was pretty well done. You can't kind of get more realistic than an actual big cat when it comes to portraying extinct big cats, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, the problem then is that the teeth were very prominent and extended below the jawline, and so therefore, if it was going to be a saber-tooth, it would have to be Smilodon. Smilodon's purely American species, which never had Neanderthals or other non-Homo sapiens. If they'd just stuck with cave lions, I think it would have been equally perfect for the setting. In fact, more, because cave lions had a Eurasian distribution, so it would have been fine. And I don't think having kind of quite goofy banana-shaped false teeth glued onto these lions makes them any scarier than just a pair of lions.
Did you notice that they were painted with a very subtle stripe pattern? It was kind of hard to tell.
I did not notice that, no.
It was very subtle, and it wasn't like orangey and black tiger stripes. It was more kind of like the stripe pattern we saw in Skyrim, if you remember the saber-toothed cats there. Yeah. It was quite a subtle stripy pattern with sort of very wide stripes.
Imagine having that job, having to paint some lions. That's
I was thinking about having to put the false teeth on them.
Yeah. But I mean, again, that sort of that if I'd noticed that would have annoyed me, because that sort of ties into the misapprehension that saber-toothed tigers have anything to do with modern tigers, which they don't. We don't have any record of coat coloring in saber-tooths, but if we had to guess, it would be somewhere between plain coated, like adult pumas or lions, or maybe partial rosetting like leopards or jaguars, because they are kind of ambush predators who kind of live on the edges of woodland. So they would have needed to either fit into dappled sunshine or be at home kind of on the open plains. So stripes would not be an advantage there.
The out of place animal that stuck out the most to me was the marabou stork. Did you notice that one?
Yeah,
which is
the vultures.
Kind of. Yeah, it was with the vultures. I don't know enough about whether those vultures were out of place, but marabou stork is a pretty distinct-looking African bird, which is obviously when they were filming in Kenya. But if they're in Asia or Europe where they're supposed to be set, that bird is obviously out of place.
I did notice a curlew call in the background of some of the shots as well, which would, I guess, place it in kind of northern Eurasia as for that. But yeah, I don't know. There's not an awful lot of animals shown in this, really, apart from all the various humans. There's not a lot of animal shots.
There were wolves, but the wolves are all across the world, basically. So
yeah.
Something I didn't realize at the time, but Ross, remember we recently reviewed an Italian movie called Adam and Eve Meet the Cannibals?
Mm-hmm. How could I forget?
Well, I hadn't seen this movie recently enough to make the connection, and I knew that was sort of capitalizing on the success of this film because it came out, I think, the year after it or something like that. But I didn't realize how it's beat for beat basically a remake of this movie, except with Adam and Eve instead of a Neanderthal tribe. So apart from the fact that it's Adam and Eve, we have, in the beginning, they get attacked by a tribe of hairy monkey people. The cannibal tribe, from the title, are red-headed, grotesque-faced, Neanderthal-like people. They could have used the same costumes, as far as I can tell. The modern human tribe that they run into is covered entirely in green body paint, which very much looks like the body paint from this movie as well. Mm-hmm. So basically, every group they run into is beat for beat in that movie. We also have
the bear
fight.
Yeah.
Yes, a one-on-one bear fight. We have a meandering quest, which is one of our main tropes. Now, in this movie, the meandering quest actually has a point, which I think is the only caveman movie where the meandering quest actually was related to the plot in any way.
Yeah, but I do have questions about that. So the whole quest for fire is that the Neanderthals can't make it themselves. They have to steal it from other groups or from lightning strikes or whatever. So they go off to find it, and they leave the three main Neanderthals bugger off essentially and leave the rest of the tribe in the middle of a kind of sunken swamp on a tiny island. And they go off on this quest and they find fire, but they also the leader gets taught how to make fire from scratch by the Homo sapiens group that Ika belongs to, like how to do the classic 2 bits of wood rubbed together. In the time he's with the modern Homo sapiens, it's at least long enough for him to learn some of their language and some of their kind of ways, because he speak at the end in the sort of language of Ika when he's back.
I'm not sure. The language was kind of hard to decipher, but we can get into the languages, I guess, in more detail because
how long does the quest take? I mean, these people have been left with no fire, no access to kind of foods. They should just be kind of rotting skeletons by the time they get back, by my reckoning.
I mean, it feels like it just takes a few days, but like by the time, in the last shot, she's already got a pregnant belly, so like at least a few months, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little unclear exactly what the timeline is. Another strange connection. Oh, the pregnant shot in the last scene is again a parallel between Adam and Eve Meet the Cannibals and this movie. But another thing is a weird obsession with dicks. In this movie, the fight with the fight with the cannibal guys where the main guy gets his dick bit and then Ika has to heal it, and then when he's captured by Ika's tribe, they're inspecting him and then they put him to work as like a sex toy kind of. I didn't quite understand what was going on there.
That was very much shades of Futurama and Amazon Women in the Mood kind of snoo going on, I thought.
But in Adam and Eve Meets the Cannibals, you remember, I can't remember which, I think it's the hairy monkey people when they first meet them, one of them is inspecting under his loincloth, right? It's weird. It's like beat for beat, that movie is remaking this one.
It's a late 70s, early 80s thing, I think, possibly.
Possibly also because Desmond Morris was a consultant on this movie.
Yeah, another person that's maybe got an unhealthy obsession.
Desmond Morris is the author of a book called The Naked Ape. Have either of you actually read that book?
Yeah, I have, yeah.
I've not read it, but I'm familiar with it.
Okay, I haven't read it either, but does anybody want to just give a quick overview of what's wrong with it?
It's quite a salacious title, given how tame the actual book itself is. But I mean, it's just, I guess it's evil psych. I mean, it's one of the sort of looking at what does being a primate mean for humans and their behavior. What aspects are typical for a primate that we've kind of cloaked with the kind of I guess the terms of modesty and behavior, but what actually is just the fact that we are rather large, unhairy monkeys.
So when it comes to the language in this movie, Desmond Morris worked with Anthony Burgess, who is the author of
Clockwork Orange.
Clockwork Orange, yeah. And so Anthony Burgess did the languages and worked with Desmond Morris, who developed a system of gestures for the Ulam tribe. And they don't have a very fleshed out language, but they do have a very gestural language, which to me felt very not human, very monkey-like. Mm-hmm. But also very natural. I believed it. I just didn't believe that it was Neanderthals who were acting like that, which I think comes directly from Desmond Morris, who is not an anthropologist, but is a zoologist, which I guess is exactly what your human gestural language would end up being if you got a non-human biologist to write your gestural language for your humans, right?
Yeah. And that's something that I think quite a few authors and depictors of Neanderthals have done is kind of emphasize that maybe they had a very complex sign language. It's certainly something that appears in the works of, I think, William Golding's book, The Inheritors. I think the Neanderthals in that have a sign language. Certainly Clan of the Cave Bear has some of that. And Bjorn Curtin's Dance of the Tiger has some of that too. So, yeah, it's something that could be on the bingo card.
I think there's this big idea that sign language is somehow, as someone who's fluent in American Sign Language, there's a lot of people who think sign language is a lesser language than spoken language, and that it's somehow more primitive and it would have come prior to spoken language, whereas you can communicate the same complex ideas and whatnot. So maybe there's just this idea that it came beforehand and was first and more primitive than spoken language.
Yeah, there could be some of that. And certainly there are kind of possibly problematic depictions in Quest for Fire. I think another thing, there's an obsession with sex between Neanderthals and modern humans, and also the way that they have sex as well is I think supposed to be significant in this. So
yeah, for sure.
My understanding is that when the leader of the Neanderthals is with the modern Homo sapiens in this little kind of cage, acting as a sort of a sex slave, I guess, like to a stud, essentially. I mean, that's kind of what it seems like, that they're using him to improve their stock.
They had the women lined up to like have a turn with him, right? So
yeah, and he was visibly exhausted the next day, snoring when Ika comes to find him. But there seems to be the kind of association with missionary eye to eye position is the kind of Homo sapiens way, and so that's how the Homo sapiens present to Neanderthal first of all, and then they move to a kind of on all fours, a more animal-like position, which the other Homo sapiens find hilarious, and I guess is meant to reinforce the kind of animal nature of the Neanderthals. Which I mean, that is interesting if it wasn't played in kind of such a salacious kind of schoolboy sniggering kind of way.
Yeah. Also, just obviously not accurate because bonobos have what we call ventro sex instead of missionary because it doesn't make sense to call it missionary when it's a bonobo doing it, I guess. But like stomach to stomach sex, bonobos do that. Bonobos famously have, kinky sex.
A lot of sex.
Lots of sex, every kind of sex. So, I mean, if they're doing it and they're our closest relative, it makes sense that it's probably going back to our common ancestor, which means that humans have always, had the understanding of that position.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just not that believable to me that it's again probably, I'm going to imagine, the influence of Desmond Morris on this being like, they're animals, humans are animals. At some point, we learned how to not be animals or something like that, right?
It's also, I guess, a very visual way to depict otherness. And difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we have a few things where, assuming we're at around 80,000 years ago, where the Neanderthals and the modern humans interacting would make sense because that's going to be roughly the time it actually did happen.
Yeah.
But learning how to have missionary sex, that's out of place for that time. We talked about learning humor. The Neanderthals don't have laughter or humor. And so earlier in the movie, a rock falls on someone's head and Ika is laughing like crazy and the other ones don't understand what's happening. But towards the end of the movie, they've learned humor. One of them drops a rock on the other one's head and everybody starts laughing, including the guy who got the rock dropped on his head. It was a huge rock and blood is pouring down his face, but he's still laughing about it.
I sort of half expected him just to drop dead from this massive head wound while he's laughing.
Like Wallace Shawn and the Princess Bride laughing like crazy, and then he just falls over. But we have like the evolution of humor here, and I tried to look into this a little bit at the last minute because I ran out of time, but certainly humor must have evolved long before 80,000 years ago. Certainly Neanderthals must have understood humor, right? Do you guys know anything about that?
Not really, but I imagine that non-human primates have a little bit of understanding of humor. You look at the kind of play of baby gorillas or baby chimps, that they do things that are funny to us and to them. There's all sorts of viral kind of TikTok videos of people showing magic tricks to orangutans and other kind of zoo primates, and them getting it and like being shocked. And I think there's even ones of them doing it to like baboons or other kind of more distant relatives, and they still appreciate a good magic trick.
I would say that we can definitely see a lot of these playful behaviors in the natural world that I think would have translated pretty well into the movie. What, like Ross was mentioning, we can see the play in baby gorillas, baby chimps. We see them playing with their dads. They do funny things to their dads, and like he was saying, viral videos. There's some really cute ones out there if you haven't seen them.
Yeah, I saw one just like last week of an adult gorilla playing with a child where he was like sort of throwing it around. It was obviously playful, right?
Yeah, exactly.
See if I can find that video again and put it up in the show notes. The other big thing we have that may or may not be a little out of place here is the discovery of fire, which is another bingo for us. We just watched a play called Firebringer where they discovered fire. So it's again a common trope of ancient humans discovering fire. This one's a little different because they already have controlled use of fire, but they don't know how to make it, which is interesting because that's probably how controlled use of fire would have started, from collecting it from natural sources and then having to maintain it because you didn't know how to start it unless there was another lightning strike or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But again, probably way too late at 80,000 years ago, because Neanderthals definitely knew how to make fire going back probably hundreds of thousands of years for sure. But one thing that came to my mind is that I remember, possibly from undergrad or possibly from pop culture sources, hearing about modern human tribes before contact that had controlled use of fire, but didn't know how to make fire themselves and therefore had to maintain their fire. And if it went out, then they were kind of in trouble. They'd have to go trade with another group or something like that because they didn't know how to make it. And I tried to look into that a little bit this morning as well, and I couldn't find any actual sources. So this might be apocryphal stories. Do you know any better sources than I do on that one? Or have you heard that idea?
I haven't got any better sources, but I think it does make sense. I mean, there are other non-human species that can control fire. So I'm thinking about, there's a really interesting study done in the past year or two looking at Australian raptors, so firehawks. I think that's the 3 different species, so the black kite, the whistling kite, and the brown falcon. They have control of fire, and that they will, if they find during a forest fire and are able to pick up branches, they will take them to an area that's not on fire and drop it to encourage the fire to spread, which will then cook some animals that they can then eat or flush them out so that they can catch them more easily. So the idea that control of fire becomes way before kind of creation of fire seems very likely to me, just from the fact that we have other, even non-human animals that can control fire. But we're the only species that can make it.
Absolutely. I have to agree with that. I think just from what I know, as far as hominids go, I think Homo erectus may have, what we know, have been the first to use or possibly even create fire. Again, from lightning strikes from natural sources where we would have gathered it, seen it, most likely have been scared of it at first. But as Ross is mentioning, other animals use fire in interesting ways and have been for who knows how long. And I think that's going with the idea that, Homo sapiens are the top of the top and we know how to do everything and no one else can figure out how to find their way out of a paper bag. But, we're not the only ones. But to the original question of, are there any modern human groups that don't know how to make fire? I personally have never heard that. I don't know. I feel like any modern human could, not any, obviously. Let's roll that back a little bit.
Yeah, I would struggle.
Many modern humans, especially in groups, could figure out how to make a fire somehow, even with very lacking in knowledge. I don't know. I feel like that one. I don't know about that one.
Yeah, I think everybody in North America knows how to start a fire, and none of them could do it, right? Like, I've tried a few times to start a fire with just the friction method with sticks, and I can get a lot of smoke, but I've never got a full fire, so it's not easy to do. So just knowing how to do it is a different question from being able to do
That's
it.
That's a very good point. Yeah, knowing how to do it and actually doing it are very different things.
Yeah.
The 2 examples that I came across where people suggested that non-Western tribes didn't have the knowledge to make fire, even though they had the controlled use of it, were the Sentinelese, who famously live on North Sentinel Island and are one of the last, not fully uncontacted, but they don't want anything to do with outsiders, and so the Indian government, which owns the island, doesn't allow anybody to go there.
That's the Andaman Islands, yeah.
The Andaman Islands, yeah. The last guy who tried to go on to North Sentinelese Island very famously was an American Christian missionary, and he got shot to death with bows and arrows pretty quickly, and his Bible didn't save him. But so the problem with that is we are not in contact with them. We know they have fire. But how would we even know if they don't know how to make it if we're not contacted? So that just sounds like bullshit.
Yeah.
The other example is early explorers said that the indigenous Tasmanians didn't know how to make fire. But again, there's no evidence for that, and it just sounds like, colonial racist bullshit again. So I know I've heard this idea that there are early uncontacted human tribes that didn't know how to make fire and had to keep their fire going and had to get new fire from trading if their fire went out. But I actually can't find a single corroborating source for that. So that might just be Western bias and basically racism that fuels that that narrative.
Yeah, which, as we are all aware of in this field, is nothing new. So,
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sadly, that is the case. I'm going to have to scoot, guys, but yeah, that's been really fun. I think this was a good one to do. And yeah, you guys talk amongst yourselves maybe sometime.
Ross, one quick fact for you before you go. Did you know that Ika, the female lead in this, is Tommy Chong's daughter?
Of Cheech and Chong?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Ray
wow.
Don
I did
Chong
not know
No, I
that.
did
plays
not know that.
Ika. I didn't know that until I looked it up on IMDb either.
I have seen her in other stuff, though. I looked her up on IMDb. I've seen her in. She's really good in Tales from the Dark Side. That's she's in a really neat little segment from that film, like a portmanteau horror, which is a genre that I love. But yeah, she was really good in this. I thought that considering that she has no intelligible lines, she was able to kind of put across her kind of her motivations and her emotions, and she was a very good character in this.
Yeah, I thought she did a great job. I mean, we've talked about movies where you don't have a real language, so it's hard to act when you don't have a real language to fall back on, right?
Cool. All right, guys, I'll catch you later.
Okay, thanks,
Cheers.
Ross.
See ya.
All right, so what other notes do we have on this movie that we can talk about?
I think something about Quest for Fire that is underrated is a lot of people do, like, even in the beginning of this podcast, for example, I was saying, oh, it's not the greatest of movies and whatnot. But when you think about other movies that are out there, like you were mentioning, I have not seen anywhere near as many as you guys have. You guys are talking about certain movies and shows, and I'm like writing them down because I have to go watch them now.
I'll send you a link to our Letterboxd watch list. We have
yes,
like still 150 movies to watch on our list, and they're getting more and more obscure as we go down the list.
Yes, perfect. But this movie it does something that I feel other movies struggle with, and that's putting you in the setting and place. You kind of find yourself, you're not on the edge of your seat, obviously, I don't think, but you're involved. You know what's going on. You are interested in the plot line, the characters, and what's going to happen with them. And I feel like even though you might not get the most attachment to the characters, because like Ross was saying, he couldn't even pick up the names of certain characters, they're still important, and you can find common ground with them. And I think they did a good job with that, even if they're not modern humans.
Yeah, the thing about it is that it feels very real in that, like, it's believable. It's just not real as in, like, accurate to the way things actually happen. So, like, having Desmond Morris do this gestural language, they really do feel like, I mean, they feel a lot like chimpanzees or other monkeys or something. In a lot of ways, it feels very believable. It doesn't feel believable that they are an actual type of human that existed 80,000 years ago, right?
Exactly. It feels like it's it looks like, or let me phrase this differently. It feels like we're looking through a portal into a different past.
Yes.
Like it's a past that could exist, but it just didn't in our world. And I feel like that gives it some sort of believability.
It's like a fantasy past, like Lord of the Rings or something, where you're not going to criticize that for not being historically accurate. And I think, like, from what the director has said in every interview about this movie, is like that was the point. It was never to be a scientifically accurate picture of the actual human past, but it was supposed to be an alternate reality past, or like a fictional world past that was believable and felt realistic without necessarily being historically or scientifically accurate.
Absolutely. Which, there are some good parts, but historical accuracy, costumes are good. They do look good, but we could be a little closer, I'd say, on the accuracy of the movie. But it wasn't supposed to be, as you mentioned, so we shouldn't really anchor too much on that. But I did enjoy the movie. It was a good movie. Hour and 40 minutes. It's not the shortest of feature films, but I do think they got their story across pretty well in the time that they had. and the plot line, as mentioned, actually existed
Yeah.
and they followed through with it. I know there's a lot of these movies where it's kind of like they just wander off into the woods and never come out, and that's the plot.
That's probably the most consistent trope in like these strict caveman movies. We do like we branch out. We do other archaeology or paleontology movies. We last movie we did was Jurassic Park 3, so we don't always
Okay.
do cavemen, but the cavemen movies are our main focus. And you have no idea how many of these caveman movies just have somebody gets kicked out of their tribe, they wander around, and a bunch of stuff happens, and then the movie ends with no real plot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like if you're making a caveman movie, that is where what your starting point is, and very few movies really stray from it. Like going back to 10 million, 1 million, 1 million years BC. The one with
Yeah.
Raquel Welch, right? One of the most classic caveman movies, and there's no plot to it. The guy gets kicked out of his tribe. He finds a new tribe. He gets kicked out of that tribe. They wander around. A bunch of dinosaurs fight with them, and then I can't even remember how it ends. There's a big earthquake that kills everybody or something. Like, there's no real plot to that movie.
I one of my Everyone hates me whenever I put it on. I rarely put it on because it's pretty awful. Is the Iceman.
Hmm.
I don't even know who's in it or anything, but it's about Otzi.
Oh,
And it's
yes.
just
I was going to say, which Iceman? Because there are
yeah.
two archaeology-based Iceman movies.
Who's the other one? What's the other
It's
one?
from 1984, I think. Some sort of mysterious geochemical company discovers a Neanderthal frozen in a block of ice in Alaska, and they thaw him out, and he comes back to life. It's
Okay.
it's pretty good, but it's a little problematic in the way a lot of these older 80s movies
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Well, this one's based on like what happened to Otzi and how he found his way alone with the arrow in his back on the mountain. And
Yeah,
it's
it's similarities to this
yeah.
one because it's got the conlang, the constructed language, which is supposed to be based on
Hmm.
the Raetic language. So it's like not
Mm.
entirely fictional, but they're trying to reconstruct as best they can the actual language he would have been speaking at the time, which is pretty interesting.
That's very interesting. I love when I find it sad that it takes movies to produce languages and not academics, but like we fully fleshed out when we did Lord of the Rings, we fully fleshed out Tengwar and Sindarin and Quenya, and like Tolkien had most of the work done, but when they did the movies, they wanted to finish it. So they had linguists come in, they finish it. And I wish in anthropology we could focus a little more on finishing those languages ourselves than waiting on the movie productions to come in and say, okay, it's time for us to show what this language sounds like. But, you know, that's a little different from this movie, though.
I guess movies have the money to do that.
That's a very good point. Movies definitely have a lot more money than we see in academia.
Another movie with a constructed language where they got an anthropologist or a linguist to come in and do the language was Alpha. Did you see that one?
Oh, I don't know why I almost forgot what that was. Yes, I love Alpha. Yes, Alpha is it is one of my favorite Ice Age caveman-y movies just because obviously it's not I mean to say it never could have happened obviously is not true because it could have, but to say that's how dogs started with humans is a little
Mm-hmm.
iffy. Um, but I do enjoy that movie, and the language I do think is very good in that movie. That
Mm-hmm.
it seems like everyone actually knows what they're saying and that they're actually saying things. So it seems like they did a good job with the scripting in Alpha.
Yeah, it feels like a real language. And like a lot of these movies with a constructed language, there's like very little dialogue.
Yeah,
But that one, I guess there is very little dialogue because most of it is just a boy alone with a wolf. But in the scenes where they have multiple people, it really feels like they're talking a fully fleshed out language in that one.
absolutely. Yeah. I really do enjoy that about that movie. It really I feel when the language is there, it really helps bring in the audience because if the people can't communicate, it feels like they're not people,
Hmm.
I guess. I don't know. Yeah, the ability for the individuals in the movie to communicate, whether it's Quest for Fire or Alpha or any of these other movies, I think really affects the overall quality of the audience's understanding of what's going on. And if they spend more time on developing, whether it's gestural communication or just how the characters communicate with each other, improves the audience experience.
One of the things I read about the language in this movie is, so the language was done by Anthony Burgess, as we said, and I read an article that he wrote when this movie came out talking about how he came up with the language, which was apparently a much more new thing at the time to construct an entire language for a movie, because he's talking about it as if nobody has ever done it before. And he's talking about sort of constructing a proto-Indo-European language for presumably the Ulam tribe. But something I read elsewhere is that some of the language was sort of just lifted from Cree and Inuktitut. And I think this must be the language spoken by the people in the Avaka tribe, right?
That would
Because
make sense.
they're doing some really rapid fire talking with lots of words there, which is like a lot more dialogue than the Ulam tribe do, where they're just sort of saying a few words at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would make sense if they did that.
But apparently the words that they're using are nonsense. They're not related to the plot at all. So Cree or Inuktitut speakers who've watched the movie are like laughing at it because they're just talking about random stuff that has nothing to do with anything that's going on.
I love that. That's amazing. I love it. I love it. I think, yeah, language plays a very large role in any movie, especially ones where we're trying to figure out who we are in the past.
Well, at the beginning of the episode, you suggested that this is not a very good movie. And
Yes.
maybe you have a different perspective than me and Ross because we've watched a lot of bad movies.
I think you might be right. Yeah.
Is that based on is your assessment based on the scientific accuracy or the actual like watching the enjoyment of actually watching the movie?
I would say so I'm a stickler for scientific accuracy, unless I know that it's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
So if I had gone in knowing that the director had said what you had said from the interviews, I would probably have enjoyed it more than, okay, well, clearly I should probably stop critiquing everything every 5 seconds while I'm watching this movie. Um, Not doing that, it is an enjoyable story. It is an enjoyable plot line, and the acting is when you're trying to portray creatures that aren't human. I mean, I feel like as an actor, you feel kind of different, and you can see that I think in the way that they're acting. They're trying to be human, but not human at the same time, and it gives off this kind of weird it's hard to explain. Like you get this sense of camaraderie with these people, but also the sense of we're different. Let's remember where we are. And it is an enjoyable movie. It is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you've definitely seen a lot worse movies than I have, I would definitely say. So when it comes to saying this is a bad movie, when I say that, please everyone don't take that as a don't go watch it. It is a great movie to watch and it should be on your list. I just would not rank it among my like top 10 prehistoric movies. Actually, maybe
here's
I
a
would,
good
'cause I
question. What
haven't
are
seen
your
that many.
what are your top 10 prehistoric movies? Can you do a
Yeah, I
top
was
10?
about to say, I don't even know if I've seen that many prehistoric movies because I'm so. One problem here in where I am is I try to find them, first of all, and I can't. Their VPNs are blocking them, and all these things are blocking them. And YouTube, like this is on YouTube, so that's great. A lot of these movies, like you're gonna send me the list, and I'm gonna start watching them, but I don't even know most of them. I know Alpha, I know Quest for Fire, I know Planet of the Cave Bear, I know the Iceman movie I was talking about, 10,000 BC.
Do you know Encino Man? That's our gold
Yeah,
standard.
Encino Man. Yeah, I haven't seen that in years, but yeah, Encino Man. That's really kind of it. I have not seen very many prehistoric movies, so I am not a person to be critiquing these really at the moment. But
You know, there's probably more than you'd realize once you start. This is when I made this podcast initially. I'm like, okay, I got to put together a list of movies, and I was like, if I can get 20 movies and we can do 20 episodes, then that'll be amazing, and then we can end it. And this is episode 84, I think.
Yeah.
And our watch list is longer than the movies we've done already. So
that's amazing.
Once you start looking for it, you're going to realize there's tons that you know. You've got 10,000 BC. You must know that one, Roland Emmerich.
Yeah.
You've got a new one that just came out called Out of Darkness.
Right. I did, even though that one is another let's run into the forest and all die.
Yep.
Practically, I did enjoy that one just because I also like horror suspense movies.
You've got The Croods.
Oh, okay. The Croods. Yes, I didn't count that one, but yes, The Croods. Love The Croods.
You got the whole Ice Age series. We've only covered the first one so far, but there are people in that, so it's even...
there are, yes. That is a whole... There's like 6 movies there. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. What else is popular that you would have definitely heard of here? Let's see.
Yeah, there's a lot more than I'm thinking of. Thought of. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've seen a lot with animals in them, but not people.
Yeah, if you expand it a little bit, we did the 2005 King Kong, because we've got dinosaurs, we've got an island full of prehistoric animals. Oh, one that we did recently was, or not even recently, we did it a long time ago, was Brother Bear from Disney, which is about animals, but it's really about like Ice Age people from North America, right? Yeah. So once you start looking, there's a lot of obscure ones that we've done as well, but there are actually way more really well-known popular caveman movies than you might imagine.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that, because it is definitely fun to try to transport yourself back into that time period, whether it's a book, movie, podcast, any of them. They all do.
All right, Seth. So where can our listeners find you? You have probably put up more content than we do, I would imagine. So maybe not lately with the new baby.
Listen, you'd be surprised. My partner was a little upset with my work schedule as far as the world of paleoanthropology went. So you can find me practically anywhere on socials. I just made a TikTok. I'm pretty happy about that one. Finally made it, only because in my country it still might get banned. I don't know what's going on with that app. But I made one, so you can find me on TikTok. You can find me on Twitter. I refuse to call it X.
Yeah, I do too.
You can find me on Facebook. YouTube, of course, is where I post all of my videos, which I do interviews with researchers from the field. And I also host a podcast called the Paleo Post Podcast with my host, Genevieve von Petzinger and Dr. George Nash, where we talk about Paleolithic art, paleo news, and everything going on in the greater world of paleoanthropology. And that's where you can find me. We do those weekly interviews, or as often as I can get them, and I'm all over the place. I try to find you. Let's put it that way.
All right. Well, thanks for being here again. If you want to take a look at our list of Paleolithic movies, if you ever want to talk about another one, please come back anytime.
Absolutely. It was a blast.
If you've been enjoying Screens of the Stone Age, get in touch with us. Follow us on Twitter at SOTSA_podcast and on Facebook at SOTSA podcast, or send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com. Screens of the Stone Age is supported by the Paleoanthropological Society of Canada. Find out more at pasc-scpa.ca.